The lesson.
Oh, yeah.
Phoa, what's happening, man?
How much, mate?
Thanks very much for rolling through.
Pleasure.
For the audience who may not, necessarily be familiar with what you're all about, you're a graffiti writer, and you've been doing your thing since the 80s here in Adelaide. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm semi-retired though.
So tell us a little bit, I guess, about when graffiti first grabbed you, and your memories of being young, how you got into graffiti, and then what led you into actually becoming involved in the whole thing.
Yeah, I started writing in 85. I think I was about 13 in year 9 in high school. I remember my high school as being year 8 was pretty normal, really, all just strictly academic. My father was a school teacher and actually taught at the same high school, so there was no messing around. And but by the time year 9 rolled around, and as a teenager you start getting into that rebellious sort of phase also, a bunch of guys came to the school, and I think some of them came from my ex-primary school, Linden Park, and some of them came from elsewhere. But regardless, with them came this new thing, graffiti. And look, I probably just wanted to hang out with these guys and that and just do whatever they were doing, sort of thing. I don't consciously remember sort of seeing graffiti and go, I want to be a graffiti writer. I think it was more just a peer group pressure thing, to a certain degree and that, but in a positive sort of way. I was always an angry kid and, a difficult sort of childhood and that. But yeah, I was always sort of an angry kid, but also an artistic one. So when you throw those two together, graffiti just ticks all the boxes, man. And so these guys rolled up in year 9, ended up being sort of friends with them. They were in the year below me because, by that time I was in year 9, they were year 8. So this is ABSK, Cage, and a bunch of other breakers as well. Mark Anderson, Nigel Tinning, and this sort of thing, and this was at the same time when breaking sort of took off in Adelaide as well. So it was a new happening sort of thing, and I wanted to be involved whatever they were doing on that. And I was pretty whack, and they treated me like shit and that really for the first couple of years and that. And but it's a motivational sort of thing and that, and I wanted to go out of my way to sort of prove to myself and prove to these guys that I was all right at what I was doing and that. But yeah, the first couple of years were pretty lame and stuff. So yeah, I got into graph by 85. These guys were in it by 84, and I think they let me. They let me come along and do a piece of them, one of them in 85 and one of them in 86 as well. And in the meantime, I was just doing these whack tags everywhere and all this sort of thing and that. And that wasn't really sort of till about 87, I suppose, when I sort of came into my own. And then, I just went on from there, basically.
And then, so from 87, is that, I imagine that's sort of where you started to get a bit deeper into it?
Yeah, I was pretty hooked by late 87. I mean, I was pretty hooked in 85 as well. You had to imagine, every man and his dog back then had a tag. Breaking was really popular. Everyone loved it, and then with that sort of came graffiti. I mean, graffiti sort of internationally in the Western world, it sort of stems from breakdance as well, so probably the breaking came first and foremost from our point of view, and then with it came graffiti, with it came hip-hop. And so if you're into one, you're into all, sort of to a certain degree. And I remember actually, when I got into graph, I was sort of more interested in breaking to start with, but I was hopeless at doing any sort of breaking. I could throw a backspin, that was about it though. Pretty uncoordinated with all that sort of thing, but I wanted to be involved with what was going on anyway. So I was more attuned to the art side of things and got into it a bit deeper like that. And by 87 it sort of started getting a bit serious in that. Late 87 we went to our first train yards and things like that. I think that's pretty serious.
And so what was the first tag that you had?
Oh, wow. Tags back in those days were very breaking orientated. So they weren't they were pretty sort of weird and wonderful. You had to understand that with breaking, there's no Googling anything or anything like that, You're your initiation into breaking and into graffiti and all that sort of thing is through any sort of book you can get your hand on that might be in the library or whatever and that. And it was generally something like, a how-to breakdance book or something or other, or a how-to breakdance video that might be available at the local bookstore, any of this sort of thing. There weren't any designated publications by that stage. There were no books, there were no graph mags, there were no graph shops, no websites. There's no internet. There are no mobile phones. It's all word of mouth and all this sort of thing. It's looking at record covers that come in, and most of them are pretty bloody cheesy. A lot of them, this is an American thing in that, where, okay, there was some great guys writing by the late 60s or whatever, early 70s in New York, and we all know that now, but we didn't know that back then. But then the American thing was making money on graffiti and making money on breaking and making money on anything like this, whether it's skateboarding or whatever the new sort of craze or fad or whatever you want to call it may be. And graffiti and breaking and all that sort of thing was no different. So, LA gets hold of these sorts of things, and you start seeing movies like Beat Street, you start seeing movies like Breakdance. And with that, if anyone's seen Breakdance and Breakdance 2, Electric Boogaloo and all this sort of thing, they're cheesy as hell, man. You got people wearing bloody bandanas around their legs and weird, wonderful clothes and all that sort of thing. Anyone walk down the street wearing that shit these days would get thumped. It's not cool. But back then, no one really knew any different, And there were some people that dressed like that, but they had some pretty weird names. And I can't think off the top of my head what the names were in Breakdance, to be honest, but they were pretty wacky. They weren't cool, tough names, you know what I mean? So, and so the breakers had some pretty strange names. One of the early sort of tags I remember was Shoke, S-H-O-K-E. That means nothing to anyone. I don't even know what that means. Are you just playing around with different names and all that sort of stuff, I wrote Fuse for a little while, which by this, today's standard probably sounds a bit cool on that, but then I think I remember finding out that someone else wrote it, and you learn pretty early on that you don't buy other people, and originality is the key to it all. So then I changed it to Confuse. I think I was only really confusing myself, man, because who wants to, a 7-letter tag or whatever, it's outrageous. That takes a lot of time to write. I wrote Sign, I think, for a little while, S-I-N-E. I wrote my own name for a little while. You're just really trying to find yourself. It wasn't until years later and that, to be honest, and that then I sort of went to Melbourne and was influenced by what was going on with there at the time. And this was late 87, I believe. That I sort of came back with a thought to get into it pretty damn seriously and that. And I thought, I've got to have to come up with a cool name. And I wanted something that was tough and that, like something that was, it was cool, man. Like, I don't know, like death or, something sort of crime or,
with a bit of edge to it.
Yeah, some sort of edge or something or other. So I just started flicking through the dictionary and just picking letters that I wanted to start with or whatever and that. And I think I probably just started from the beginning actually. And I got to F and I found Phoa, F-O-E. And I thought, no, I don't want to spell it that way. And probably influenced by Phase 2. With the PH sort of thing going on now, I thought I'll change it and that, and so I whacked a PH in front of it. And so I played around with that and then started off with that. And then kept that. And I have various names over the years since then, but yeah, I was just always sort of stuck with that one. Phoa does not mean noodle, and this is before the Vietnamese people were here and all this sort of thing and that. Phoa means enemy, and that's sort of the angle I was going with, all right? It's got nothing to do with bloody noodles. There were a lot of writers around before I even started in that. If you want to look at the history of Adelaide graffiti and that sort of thing, there were pieces and tags and stuff here by late 83. Certainly by early 84, was well and truly up and running. And by 85, it sort of became popular. And that's the sort of stage when you start talking about people, every man and his dog's got a tag. And my brother had a tag in that. He ended up being a cop in that, but everyone had a tag. But it just depended on what you did with it. It could be in the back of your school book, or it could be on every bus and every bus shelter going and all this sort of thing. It just depended on how far you wanted to take it. But you had a completely different sort of attitude to graffiti back then also, because, it's fun, it's happening, it's in the movies, it's on the news, it's all happy land sort of graffiti stuff. It's not until the damage bills start hitting and all the rest of it and the council starts, counting the cost and all this sort of thing that people start to get a bit bloody pissed off about it all. And the whole illusion of it being something good and something new and, the latest sort of money-making venture from America and that, it fades pretty bloody fast. And with it, go a lot of the graffiti writers, because they start realising that, girls don't hang out with graffiti writers. You don't make money out of making, out of doing graffiti. Your parents are getting their shits. It's all fun and games until the cops start knocking on the door and that. And these sorts of things generally inevitably happen. Very few writers would get through their whole record or anything without getting a knock on the door. So, the whole attitude towards graffiti changes. So, and there were many early writers before me. Like I said, when I started writing, when you look at influences and that, like I was saying before, you're looking at National Geographics, you're looking at record covers, you're looking at whatever you can get your hands on and that to be influenced by different styles and fashions and all this sort of stuff. You're just running blind, really. So in that regard, really, anybody that's got a bit more of a take on the subject and a bit more get up and go on that's out there tagging the streets and that, they're going to be your first-hand sort of influences, really. You can't Google anything, like I said earlier. So, whatever you see in the street is going to influence you. So then we're talking about people like Wiki, we're talking about Sprint, Marl, Style, Bomber, and it really depended on which line you're on as well. Because, now everything's sort of all found in one place, once again, the internet or whatever and that. Back in those days, it was very different. You're probably really only aware of whatever was going on in your particular area or your train line or within a few sort of stations of your train line and this sort of thing, Even a trip to the city or whatever, and that was a big affair. And it wasn't until later on when they started having a few writers' benches, sort of meeting points for writers and that in the city and that. Myers being one of them, the old Meyer building in Rundle Mall, which was the main one really. Before that, downtown on Hindley Street, that writers started meeting one another and exchanging ideas and that, and realising, hey, there are other people on other lines and all this sort of stuff. If you're from the western suburbs, love him or hate him and that, you probably were influenced by Sparky. If you're around Croydon or something or other, it could have been Suzie and Casbar. If you're from Gawler or whatever, it definitely would have been Captain Colour and Ecstasy. But there were other guys as well. There was Ace out there was Bonza. I mean, the list goes on really of different guys in different suburbs doing stuff, So these are the sort of influences in that. Out of Harbour, you had the OK crew with, Smear, Scunda, Blitz 202, many different writers. I couldn't name them all, to be honest. There were that many of them. Around Salisbury and that, you had Cuban and Spree. You also had Crash and Craze with big influences. These, some of these guys were real artists at their time. I mean, Captain Colour was years ahead of his time, really. Later on in '86, you had people like Kano. He was just an absolute artistic genius, really. It had to be one of the best in Australia. I'm not going to, that's no small statement. It's true, and time has borne that out, really. You had other people that we found later on in that in Mount Gambier, like Cab and Risk and Boots and Acree and Raid. And, other people out there that were doing their own thing and that. But, it wasn't until these guys started meeting one another and exchanging ideas you realised what was going on in that. So by the time, and even Noarlunga in that, I shouldn't forget people like Rust, Run and Freeze. I mean, these guys are all known by, Rust, Run and Freeze. Rust, Run and Tense. These people are all known by different names over the years and that. But, and Chrome, look, too many names to mention, to be honest, but, they all sort of added something to what was going on in that, and some of them were some pretty big names.
Mm. And these are all names that had some sort of influence
Oh,
on
big
you?
time. I remember by '86 and that, there weren't too many trains running around the place that didn't have a Rust Run or Banger tag on it. Now, these guys were doing run-ups like there was no tomorrow at the time on that, and venturing into the yards and that way before I'd been there. And there are guys that went there slightly before them. But by '87 and that, I started getting a bit more involved in that sort of thing and that. And, and then other people were getting involved as well. Mm. There was Sim, Kelkay, bunch of other people. Sway, Arms. A lot of different guys having a go at it and that, So, by '87 it sort of started to take off a bit and that's for sure, especially with a train scene. We were very late on that sort of thing. On a train scene, really, compared to other states in Australia. I mean, I think most trains in Melbourne and Sydney, they probably did their first whole cars by '82, '83. We hadn't even been in a yard until '85.
Yeah, wow.
And therein lies the difference of a small town. But you're talking, Adelaide was a very different place back then. All the shops are shut on a Sunday. They close halfway through a Saturday, and at 12 o'clock or whatever, that's it. It's a ghost town. There's tumbleweeds going through the city. That's great if you want to roll around the place of Texas and, put your tags up, and there's no cameras or anything back then, and that, just roving, police patrols occasionally or whatever and that sort of thing and that. But yeah, it's dead, man. McDonald's is open, downtown's open, the cinemas are open, and that's probably about it, man. There's no shopping like goes on these days, that's for damn sure. No late night shopping, on weekends or, Friday nights or any that sort of thing, I don't think. Don't know, a bit hazy about all that.
From, say, the late 80 period heading into the 90s, what are some of the things that you started to see in graffiti, any of the changes, like it becoming more prominent, more crews popping up?
Well, you have different generations of writers. There were guys before me, and then there was me, and there were guys after me, and there's, the generations after generation. Yeah, I started meeting up with younger guys that, perhaps me and a bunch of other guys and the earlier guys again influenced in that, And that's where you get your Tarns and your Ambush and your JBL guys and all this sort of thing and that. RCF reared its head, by the early 90s also. And when it comes to influences and that sort of thing also, people start travelling, by the sort of, by 86 or whatever and that, and start to travel, even by 85, start to travel interstate and start seeing it, wow, it's not only just happening here, it's happening interstate as well. So you're getting influenced by other writers in different states as well. I remember going to Circular Quay in Sydney, I think it was 86, and just with my sister, and just it blew my mind seeing Fab Four pieces and Rexy and all this sort of stuff. Those guys are way, way more advanced than what we're doing here. But the 90s is a bit hazy with me. From an RCF point of view and that, you got Seven that comes from Sydney. RCF's an earlier crew in Sydney. He comes over here by about, 90, 91 or something or other. Could have even been by 89, to be honest. And, by the early 90s, RCF has started here. And then, the newer members sort of joined the crew and that. I think Tarn sort of came from JBL. Ambush ended up joining. These guys on different names back then and all that sort of thing. There's quite a few guys that came from USN, Cast, DK, Riot, Best, and some other guys later on. And contrary to belief, to popular belief with some people, no, we did not rape USN. You got to understand that some crews start to sort of die out slowly and that sort of thing and that, and those members that are more interested to continue writing out of those crews want to carry the torch a bit further in that. So if there's a new happening crew in that, they're going to join the new happening crew. And so certainly, by the early 90s, mid-90s now, RCF was a real force. And, you've got Doom, of course. He, had a huge influence on what was going on with RCF as well. DK, like I said before, with Cask. I mean, and Tarns and Ambush just took it further, to be honest. They did a lot more than I ever did in the 90s, that's for damn sure. And, some really good artwork. And then, we started going into state and stuff as well, and other people from interstate start coming here as well. JME from Melbourne, Reach, Tildy. And then, even earlier than that, in 87 and that, we started meeting guys from Melbourne and that. Duet came over from Melbourne, and then we ended up going and visiting him in Melbourne and, meeting up with other writers over there like Needle. And, this is all a lot of Hurstbridge-related sort of stuff and that, and there's a bit of an Adelaide-Hurstbridge line sort of connection there, really. It ended up being fortuitous in the long run, really, because, Hurstbridge has got a great sort of graffiti history and some really, really talented writers that live on that line, your Jewel and Pest and all this sort of thing, and McLeod and, Puzzle, of course, and, a bunch of other guys, too many to mention, but, had some great adventures going over there, and those guys had some great adventures coming here.
And then, so when RCF first formed in Adelaide, were you part of that when it initially happened here in
I was the
SA?
first, I think from memory, I was the first RCF member here in Adelaide. And yeah, it was sort of my crew sort of thing and that here.
You mentioned Hurstbridge and the relationship with Hurstbridge. One of my favourite Australian MCs is Bice B.
Yeah.
And he's a writer and he's got a song,
Top
Hursty. So you guys have a relationship?
Yeah, I painted with him, man. No, he's a top bloke, man. Yeah, no, he's a legend.
So when did you guys first sort of meet up?
I've never had a sort of close relationship with him, but because we all know the same people and that, and you know, we bumped into one another, and it could be sort of, you know, at some sort of hip hop night or something, or it could be at some bloke's house or whatever. Yeah, no, just had a bit to do with him and that. No, just a really nice guy, and yeah, I don't have a personal relationship with him and that, you know. So yeah, I don't remember the first time we met or anything like that, but yeah, you know, great minds think alike sort of thing and that, and kindred spirits sort of stuff, you know. That goes without saying.
Talented artist.
Yeah.
Real talented.
Yeah, many respects.
Now, an interesting thing that you sort of just touched on earlier was about, you know, biting. And I guess, you know, one of the whole key things is to be original. Do you find that there was more emphasis on that back in the 80s, maybe the 90s, and perhaps there is now? And like, what's your take on biting? Explain it, I guess, in your
I don't think it's ever changed really in my mind, and I really couldn't tell you what goes on these days. I don't know, you know, I see an artwork, whether it was done years ago or it was done yesterday or whatever, you know, and I like what I like. And I can't always explain it so much. And again, it harks back to what I said earlier about, you know, just learning by whatever we could get our hands on. You know, we were just sponges for information in the early days. And it really wasn't until like Subway Art came out in '85 that there was sort of a bit of an outlining of the sort of unwritten rules, so to speak, although it's a contradiction, of course. But it's in print for the first time that, you know, a graffiti writer prides himself in his originality. And I think that could even be a word-for-word quote. That's how much is drummed into my head. And right or wrong, and ended up being right, thankfully, you know, that's the way I've always felt. Now, of course, you can be influenced by other people, and nobody's perfect. You know, we've all probably bitten something, you know, subconsciously even, you know. But, no, you try and pride yourself in your originality in that. My father had a take on graffiti very different to my mum, for instance, and his take was sort of, you know, graffiti's great, son, but when are you going to move on? Because it all looks the same. I remember him saying this distinctly by about 1986, in appreciation of art. And he just said, you know, it's fine to do graffiti, but it all looks the same. And I go, what do you mean it all looks the same? You know, different letters, different shapes, colours or whatever and that. He goes, yeah, but it's all the same sort of process. It all looks the same. And it took me years to work that out. No, I'm still fighting that sort of argument, you know, in my own mind. And I like traditional looking graffiti and that, you know, and some people say, oh, that's old school or whatever and that, you know, but you should have a defined sort of letter structure going on there, and it should be all about the name. And, you know, there are graffiti sort of writers that are artists and there are graffiti writers that are vandals. And I've sort of really always put myself in the vandal category, to be honest. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, about being an angry sort of artistic kid. I'm not interested in painting fancy pictures and that for people and making money and doing faces everywhere or whatever people want and that. No, it's all about the name. But I want to do the name nicely and I want to do the name in nice colours. And some things can be repetitive or whatever and that, but I don't know. I'm different these days, you know, after all these years and that, I own the right to do whatever I want, to be honest, so I don't really care anymore. I don't care what people think. You know, whereas when you're younger and that, you care a lot more. If you're posting things online, maybe you care a lot more. I don't partake in any of that sort of stuff, so I don't really care.
You mentioned unwritten rules or unwritten, you know, laws of graffiti. Give us your take, I guess, on what some of the unwritten rules are. I mean, we talk about...
Well, they've changed over the years to a certain degree also, but there's still underlying sort of rules of humanity, you know, as in like just treating people bloody normally. It doesn't matter, you know, what they write and all that sort of stuff. You know, a good person's a good person. You know, one mistake a lot of people make is never confuse a bad writer with being a bad person or a good writer with being a good person. That is so bloody naive, it's not funny. It really is. Why would someone that automatically does a really good piece and that be a good person? That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense whatsoever. Or somebody that couldn't string two words together or something or other in a painting or whatever and that and everything drips and that for some reason he's an arsehole? No, that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. It's about how you treat one another and that, you know. And there's certain lines you should never cross. And it's got nothing to do with graffiti, but, you know, you don't slag off people's manners and, you know, you don't steal and all this sort of stuff. Call them the 10 Commandments, whatever. It makes no difference. They're pretty decent laws to live by. Mm. But, I don't know, as far as graffiti goes, I don't know. Yeah, originality is good. Yeah, I'd rather see someone walk the walk than talk the talk.
If you cross someone out, put yourself up next to it.
Yeah, if you want to be 100% honourable, yeah. Well, yeah, no, I'm all about that. But then that's different. I'm a bit older and that sort of stuff, you know. If you're younger, I don't really know how they'd handle that sort of stuff. There used to be some old rules about, you know, if you could burn it, you could go over it and all this sort of stuff, or you're going to learn that one the hard way. It doesn't necessarily work that way. Little guys, younger guys, you know, they could be some tough guys sometimes as well, and you get a smacking. So it's really got nothing to do with whether your piece is better or not. Maybe it could be about how fast you can run. I don't know.
Now, I guess as someone who, you know, picked up a can quite a while ago for the first time, obviously, like, the paint, the cans, the nozzles, everything is different now. They actually make, you know, paint specifically for graffiti, whereas I imagine back in the 80s, that wasn't the case.
No.
So tell us a little bit about the paint back then in comparison to now. And
I love old paint, you know, I really love old paint. I get nostalgic about it, I really do. And there's some people like Cab, he's got a, you know, a similar sort of love for it, you know, we could talk about it forever. I never really thought about paint so much until, you know, the types of paint and old paint and that sort of thing, really, until Duet came over from Melbourne. And he'd been schooled from people like Jewel and that, you know, older writers and stuff in Melbourne. And, you know, we just used whatever was on the shelf and that. But Duet gave me an appreciation of trying to seek out the older paint because it was fast disappearing and to savour using it and to use it for special pieces and all this sort of thing and not take it for granted. Early paint in Adelaide, there was obviously no going to the spray paint, you know, graffiti writer shops and that and buying every colour of the rainbow or anything like that. You're just generally dealing with whatever's in a hardware store, whatever's in an auto shop. You're just dealing with whatever spray paint you can get your hand on. One of my first sort of little dabbles with spray paint, I think, was with hairspray. Other people, I remember doing run-ups with a couple of dudes and that was sheep spray. I mean, it didn't really matter and that was getting painted over the next day and that, whatever marks, you know. But, you know, we're dabbling in everything to see whatever works. People were using floral spray down the track and that. The first time I ever saw floral spray, I think, was by Kano using it in 86. I thought, wow, what's that shit? And again, it depends on, you know, its purpose and what sort of wall you're doing it on and all this sort of stuff. Some colours are okay, some of them aren't and that. But, you know, it's for painting silk flowers. It's not going to have a great deal of sort of, you know, longevity or anything by any means. But, you know, so, and paint also, in the early days and that, it was dictated, whatever was available in a hardware store was dictated by fashion and that to a certain degree. So earlier on in that, you know, you had things like, I don't know, Glossmaster Purple Vogue, you had Glossmaster Lollipop Pink. You know, there were pinks and purples basically available. There's a Dulux pink. There were pinks and purples available in some colours and that because this is the late 70s and that basically, and we're getting the leftovers from the late 70s. So you want to look at cars and things like that, they were painted different colours back then. And you know, the fashion of cars and car paint for that matter will change over the years also. There are car colours probably available now in spray paint that weren't available 20 years ago because they weren't fashionable. A lot of car paint when I was younger and that, if you wanted a purple, it was metallic purple. It was very, very difficult to find a purple that didn't have metallic in it. You know, there was mulberry and there was violet or something from memory in duplicate colour, but they both sort of had bloody metallic stuff in them. But again, you could use them if you wanted to, you know, in the right context. There was a planet purple, I think, in Dulux that had metallic in it as well. Spray ink was a huge thing. Spray ink was huge in Adelaide. You know, in 85, there was a certain place they were getting all this spray ink from and that. So there was spray ink that was used left, right and centre. But these are all pretty well primary colours. So you had yellow, red, blue, dark green. You know, there was a pink available and a beige, but those didn't get used so much until later. But yeah, specifically from this place they were sourcing them from, we're looking at pretty well just, 4 or 5 different colours: dark blue, black, the red, the yellow, the green. And if you look at a lot of the early sort of masterpieces that were done, the larger sort of pieces and that by guys like, Wiki and Bomber and other characters and that, they were using this spraying. So they were using whatever they could get their hands on, sort of thing, and that, so those colours featured prominently in the pieces they were doing. Later on in that, people start dabbling in things like shoe spray, Wapru and Tucson, and they've got the denim blues and the aquas and things like that. And these are colours that are not available in other ranges. And with that came the strawberry pinks and the shell pinks, and then the Wapru you had the hot pink, and then Plasticate was huge here. Plasticate was massive. It didn't have the best pressure really, but you could work with it pretty well. And that had a fairly large colour range compared to other brands. I mean, you go into any sort of hardware store that had Glossmaster or Dulux or anything like that, and you're probably looking at, a colour range that's extended no further than probably 12 colours or something or other off the top of my head, And, a couple of those would be silver and bronze and copper, and flat black or something. You can't do much with those because that, so that lessens the range of colours you have also. So really, if you want to do a piece or whatever, you had no choice but to mix and match all these different brands and all these different sorts of, all these different kinds of paint. No choice whatsoever. Then when you looked at Solver, with the Plasticate, they must have had 30 different colours. They might have had, I can't even remember off the top of my head, but, a couple of different greens, a couple of different blues, baby blue, astro blue, fresh green, shamrock green, sand. Yeah, that's some great colours. Dove grey, machinery grey. Yeah, that's some really, really, really nice colours. But yeah, we tried to grab whatever good ones we could from the old days with the purples and the pinks and the oranges and all this sort of stuff that were fast disappearing. If you're lucky enough to get hold of those, I had some fond memories of that sort of stuff. But generally, later on in that, when you're just dealing with run-of-the-mill sort of paint that was available in shops, you're mixing and matching, shoe spray with bloody automotive paint, with an enamel paint. It's not the flat sort of variety that you get these days. They're all in 250 gram size cans. They're not in 350 gram, 400 grams. They're not made by writers for writers. They're made for spray painting chairs and that or something. I never saw anyone use it for that stuff. It makes me wonder.
And then also like the nozzles. They didn't
You're just
have...
pretty well dealing with whatever's on the can. Dulux, for instance, typically had a blue nozzle on there and that, and it just gave you sort of this, just the square nozzle, as they call it, sort of variety of nozzle. That was about it. Most of them were square nozzles, really. And, you just learn to use them. Plasticate had a round nozzle. But like I said earlier, Plasticate had a strange sort of pressure to it. So if you wanted to outline in Plasticate, you wanted to outline with a full can. And if you were smart about it, you outlined the whole of the piece when the can was full without filling in any 3D or shadow or any of that sort of stuff, because we're halfway through the can when it started stopping and starting. That's when you start fighting with it and filling in your shadow and all the rest of it because you can get away with it. But it was about learning how to use the can. And I remember when Disguise came over here in 86 it was, I think, and he was doing a come-out piece with a bunch of other guys in the River Torrens. And I saw him outline this Aboriginal face that he did, and he was using a Dulux black. And he basically lifted up the blue nozzle and then put it down ever so slightly and then only touched it. And just came out with the most incredible sort of round sort of nozzle pullback, so to speak, outline with this Dulux. And I'd never seen anyone do that before. I thought, wow, you can actually do that with a Dulux? All we ever would have used them for before was like tagging or filling in things. I didn't actually think you could do any detail with them. Tucson's had a round nozzle. Old Touch-Ups had a round nozzle. Duplicolors had a round nozzle. So you use whatever you had that would, for specific purposes. And I suppose that dictated what you're going to do and how you're going to do it to a certain degree. Mm. And then, now when you've got all this modern paint that's available, and now I bet no one uses Touch-Ups. I bet no one uses shoe sprays. The sales would have dropped off immensely, and so would the shoplifting rates, no doubt.
Yeah, and I mean, that was my next question, because obviously now, paint's made by riders, for riders, and then sold by riders or friends of riders, because they're the ones who own the stores.
Yeah, that is different.
So obviously, and the fact that everything's caged up now, and even if you wanted to steal the cans, you sort of really can't. But back then, was that like a thing where it was, I've heard stories that, real riders don't pay for their paint. They just go out there.
Yeah, some people have that attitude, and I can sort of understand that. But, and that's a maturity sort of growing up thing as well, I couldn't go anywhere near doing anything like that these days, even if I tried. I just couldn't even sleep at night, I'm old and grey enough as it is, thanks very much. I just can't deal with the stress. There came a point where I just couldn't do that shit anymore. And I often wonder about that sort of stuff as well, like you go, in the old days, you go to a paint shop, and there were certain runs you could do in a way. Look, I suppose, again, we got this from Subway R. There was something along the lines of it's unsporting to pay for your spray paint. Not only was it unsporting, but it was bloody unrealistic. In this day and age, I don't know why, kids seem to have a lot more money. I know I gave my son a lot more than I ever got. But I wanted to steer him away, not that he was involved with graffiti or anything, but I wanted to steer him away from doing shit like that as well, like it's no way to go. And you grow a conscience of all this sort of stuff. Some people do. And but when I was younger, I didn't have two brass razors to rub together. So if you wanted to do graffiti, and copious amounts of graffiti, as we really wanted to do in that, well, you had to have the ammunition to do it with. There's only one place you're going to get it from, and you've got to liberate it from somewhere, and you've got to be pretty crafty about it. So, there was certain sort of runs you could do. Ranella was one, bloody Port Road was another, and that, where you could basically, you could catch a bus or whatever. No one had cars back then. You could catch a bus and you could go up like 10 bus stops or whatever and that, and everyone, with 3 dudes or whatever and that, and everyone had a big bag with them and that. And you get off at the bus stop or whatever and that, and you walk back about 4 or 5 bus stops or whatever you need to do on that. And on that run, you would know every single paint shop, every single art shop that contains spray paint of any description, markers, ink, whatever, of any description whatsoever. And if it was possible on that, you could get what you could get and all this sort of stuff. And, you pick your bag up and you're plonking it down at the next shop and that without rattling and stuff. And, well, hopefully it's getting heavier as you're going along. I'm not shitting you. There were days, and quite a few of them, and it was quite the norm, really, if you knew what you were doing and that. You could go out on a good day and that and come home with 50 cans. And that's without even going nuts and getting, some people were a lot better than others and that, and you see this sort of stuff in Style Wars and that, I don't know, I can't remember the exact figures, but the bloke reckons he's stuffing it in his coat and his pants and he's getting all this, that and the other. I didn't know too many people like that, but you could do it. And there are other people that bag racked and all this sort of stuff, but, generally it was 1 or 2. I always sort of put the sort of theory that if you could get 1, you could get 3. That's the way I looked at it. Well, there's no bloody different in that. It's the same bulge, really. And, cruise on out and that, fill your bag up and stuff, and then head off to the next one. And, you could have a few adventures on the way and that where things go a bit wrong or whatever and that. But, I often look back at it and I just think, what the hell are we thinking? How many times can you go? And this conscience got me a bit with this one as well. And just logic. How many times can you go to a shop and that and just never buy anything and tell them that you're just looking? And as a shop owner or whatever and that, you're going to see your stock slowly disappear and that, and the same teenagers hang out there and that and look at your paint, and then come back a month later and look at it again, and no one ever buys anything. It's just bloody illogical, but somehow it worked. But, it wasn't a criminality thing either, and I've got to stress that, I don't think anyone that did graffiti and that really, illegal graffiti back in the day and that really looked at it as upon being some mastermind criminal. You sort of looked upon like somehow you had a right to do it all, and you do have a right to do it all, and you're doing no wrong. You're not breaking any laws. As some of the artwork said, and that if art is a crime, may God forgive me, and will I go to hell for this, and all these sorts of comments and that, and and there's some truth to all that. We never looked at ourselves as being criminals. We never looked at ourselves as doing the wrong thing. We're just expressing ourselves. That's the only way we sort of looked at it and that, But I can, being older now, I can see both sides of the argument now. But these are different times, very, very different times. And as you said earlier, in that, now the people that run these shops and sell this paint and all the rest of it, 9 times out of 10, you're personal friends with them. So you're going to get discount or whatever and stuff. And we have money these days and jobs and all these sorts of stuff. And that sort of aspect of it has changed entirely, And you wouldn't think of racking from them or anything, But before that, it was it was an unknown sort of enemy or whatever, so it didn't matter. Out of sight, out of mind.
And then one of the other things that I always wondered was, obviously, you know, photos are now taken on your iPhone or whatever and posted on Facebook. But back then, you're getting your snaps. And I always wondered, like, obviously to get your snaps back then, you've got to get them processed.
Mm.
Is there ever any issues where when you're going to get your photos developed, the people who develop them see it, look at it as vandalism, and then go and snitch?
I'm sure there were, but I don't remember any off the top of my head, to be honest. It's not something I remember encountering, to be honest. I think just like most businesses, they're quite happy. As long as it wasn't some big marijuana crop or pornography or whatever, and that, they're quite happy to turn a blind eye to it. You also have to understand that, you know, we understood what was going on a lot better than they understood what was going on. It was a complete mystery. They're just seeing artwork or what, it means nothing to them.
Mm.
Now, if you're going in and getting train shots or whatever, and that's a little bit different. You know, you might be running a bit of a risk there. But yeah, again, I didn't really see I never encountered any problems or anything like that.
So that wasn't a prominent issue back then?
I probably remember a couple of comments like, I hope you didn't do this or whatever. And you go, no, we're just taking photos and stuff.
Because they can't really prove that it was you.
Yeah,
Painting.
and look, I probably vaguely remember, you know, maybe not in this state, but other states and that, where people are going to pick up photographs and, you know, police are waiting for them or whatever and that. But they probably never even ended up getting done anyway. But yeah. Yeah, no, it wasn't really an issue.
The lesson. 2-7. Oh, yeah.